I'm here with Paul Soglin, Mayor of Madison. Little handshake to start or something.
Former Cardinal
Former
staff
Cardinal.
member.
I actually didn't know that. That's not in your Wikipedia page. Thing. But yeah, I don't know if you just want to introduce yourself a little bit and tell the world who Paul Soglin
Well, I
is.
spent 10 years as a UW student. Actually got something accomplished most years. I was undergraduate for 4 years, got my bachelor's degree, 3 years of graduate school in history, 3 years of law school. While I was in graduate school, I was elected to the city council, where I served for 5 years. And in 1973, I was first elected mayor.
Yeah.
And I did it for 6 years, left for 10 years, came back for 8 years, left for 14 years, and now I've been back for another 8 years.
Nice. Yeah, that impressive resume. Got a lot of time here in Madison.
Thank you.
Yeah. Something that I kind of wanted to ask you, I mean, you have been mayor for a while, you've been mayor a couple times, and if you had to narrow it down to one of your proudest accomplishments that's happened in your time in office, I'd like to know what you think that is. What's your crown jewel?
I think it's actually what we've accomplished in this last term in regards to issues of equity and diversity. It was and continues to be the city's greatest challenge. When I left office in '97,
Yeah.
the challenges of inequity were far less than what it was in 2011 when I returned. So in 2011 to the last data point we have is 2017. Here are some of the changes that have occurred. African American household income is up over $10,000. In terms of children in households at or below the poverty line, what the situation was in 2011, 2/3 of the kids were in households below the poverty line. Now it's 1/3. And then in terms of unemployment, we had staggering unemployment in the African American community of 26.6%, far greater than the nation and the rest of the state. Now we're under 7%, and we are below the rest of the state and the nation. We still have a lot more to do, but we've made significant progress. The Brookings Institute, which, Washington, D.C. think group which studies this stuff, says of the 100 largest cities in the U.S., there are only 11, Madison's one of them, that has seen economic growth in recent years, and it's been economic growth that's been inclusive in terms of race and ethnicity. And then the other big change is the significant reduction in African American homicides. We had a 15-month period where we had 14. We instituted a peer support program, and for the next 15 months, and currently, it was 3. We're not going to be satisfied until it's 0, but we've seen significant improvements and changes there, and it's really what I want to continue, and why I'd like to have another term.
Yeah, that's very impressive statistics on all those fronts about
Thank you.
Been able to help the problem a lot. Just about the peer support group, just curious, like a little bit more information about that.
Well,
How it's been
we
so
set
effective.
it up in the 2017 budget, and for 6 months, Deputy Mayor Gloria Reyes met with a group of community leaders from the Focused Interruption Coalition, FIC, some very active county staff as well as other city staff, and worked from the premise that in certain areas, if you really want to make progress, it's not going to be led by traditional established groups, but it's going to be done by people who've been there, who are deeply involved in the community. And what we had to do is develop a program that would get the trust of the police department, because their cooperation in these violent incidents was critical, and the trust of the community. And like I said, from the date of launching, which was about the second week of August of 2017, till now, we've seen 3 of these tragic homicides, but it's taught us a great deal about community-based and peer support efforts, and now we're going to take it in 2 other areas. At least I'd like to. City Council's not been cooperative in my asking for additional money for it, but I would just hope that it will get greater support in the future. First, we want to get involved before the tragic shooting occurs. What I'd like to see is involvement, particularly connecting with juveniles as young as 13, adults, young adults into their 20s, and working with them before the violent episode occurs. And let's keep in mind, this is not as easy as I just made it sound. These are detached folks. They are not connected to and have not been receptive to employment and training programs. They're disengaged from schools. The Boys and Girls Club is meaningless to them. And so we've got to really focus on this group of young people. The second area we want to take it is into economic development. We've had 2 instances, particularly the most important is Luna's, which is the grocery at Allied Drive, fresh food, and start doing a better job in terms of making the economy more open and supportive to the African American community, Latinx, Asian communities.
Cool. Can you talk a little bit about some of your activism when you were actually at school here at UW in the 60s? I was reading that, one of them even took place, like you were protesting at the Memorial Union, like on the stairs and stuff.
Yeah. I came to school as an undergraduate already with some political activism in high school. The civil rights movement was in full swing. So by the time I got here, my freshman year, I'd become involved in the civil rights movement and became actually treasurer of the campus SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, UW chapter. That led me on a track of civil rights activism for a number of years, which led to my work in the Chicago area on open housing, which at that time maybe I didn't. I don't know if I realized the importance of it, but it brought Dr. Martin Luther King to Chicago, and then he was the next year to actually stay in Chicago and work for open housing in Chicago after a big march on City Hall that we had in late July of 1965. But simultaneous to that, I also got involved in the anti-war movement. And I think you're referring to a demonstration on the steps of Memorial Union, which was like October 17th or 18th of 1963, which was a little more than a month before President Kennedy was assassinated. And we were there not knowing just how big the lie was. We were there to protest the presence of U.S. military advisors in South Vietnam. And actually, as it turns out, our U.S. military were more than advising. They were involved to a certain degree in combat. And of course, the whole world would change in another year with the Gulf of Tonkin and our commitment that led to 50,000 U.S. members of the armed forces being killed, and more tragedy in terms of loss of life in Southeast Asia. And all through the 60s I was involved in that campus movement.
You took some time off from being mayor, the first time to practice law, and the second time was working in the private sector. So I would like to ask you how that was transitioning thousands of employees at Epic Systems, and if there were any important lessons you learned during your time in the private sector.
Actually, yes. I mean, in Epic, I learned, I had already been very much engaged in management, which is something that's oftentimes overlooked when we're dealing with elections and political office. Particularly, it's important when we're talking about executives. At that point, when I moved over to Epic for a while, I'd actually taught at the La Follette School here in terms of the graduate program in public affairs, and had taught some management classes. But Epic experience gave me insights into management in the private sector. And I saw there that you have to have three skills, three talents. Rarely do you find two in the same individual. And yet we've got all kinds of people who are excited about being entrepreneurs. So, you know, the first thing we associate with the entrepreneur is some kind of creative idea that could be marketed. But then you have to have two other skills to go with it. One is sales. You got to be able to sell it. And if your organization's successful and grows, you're going to have to know how to manage. And I think that gave me insight as to how those of us in government can relate to growing an economy, particularly a diverse economy. Because one of the things that's characteristic of this city and so many others is that while a college education is a great opportunity for learning how to think and eventually a career, for a lot of people who don't go to college, entrepreneurship is a way of building family wealth and become established in a community.
Cool. Very good lessons learned. You were the first mayor and the fourth U.S. politician to meet Fidel Castro, if I'm correct about that. And just kind of curious, like the story of how that meeting was set up and how the actual meeting was.
Well, what had happened is Senator George McGovern, who'd run for president, was invited to visit Cuba in April of 1975. And one of the people who accompanied him was his son-in-law, Jim Rowan. And Jim and I were close friends, and Jim actually was, we'd call him chief of staff in the mayor's office at the time. So that led to discussions about a future visit by myself and some of our staff. We were in Cuba for 6 or 7 days, and the Cubans had told us from the outset that we might meet Fidel Castro at the end of the visit. Every night that we were there, they had very little regard for our getting any sleep. We would stay up till 2, 3 in the morning, arguing politics principally, challenging them about not having free elections and a free press. And the last night we were there, they shoot us out of this bodega. It was a famous restaurant where Ernest Hemingway used to hang out when he was in Havana. Salvador Allende, who became a great South American leader and was basically assassinated by our CIA and our government, used to be there. And so we were back in our hotel room by 8 o'clock. So at that point, they kind of let on that Fidel Castro was on his way. I thought it would be nice to have some ice for some drinks. We called down to the front desk to get some ice, and we're told that all the elevators were broken, which really was security in operation. A short time later, he just simply walked in to my hotel room. We had spread out a map of Madison, and Danielle Rodriguez who you would have considered to be the head of their U.S. Their State Department equivalent for the United States, was there along with one of the translators. So Castro walked into the room, went right by me, shook hands with Danielle, gave Elena a hug, and asked in Spanish, "Where's the mayor?" At this point, a lot of people were embarrassed. He thought that I was one of their junior staff members. Any case, we then sat down and we spoke. I think the most important thing is that the image of Castro at that time, and to this day, was very forceful speeches going for hours in front of tens of thousands of people. In our conversation, he was very quiet, very soft-spoken, and a number of interesting things that were shared. We gave him a baseball signed by Hank Aaron, who had just broken Babe Ruth's record for career home runs. And Castro took the ball and looked at it and asked what was the significance of Hank Aaron's signature. And we explained to him that he now held the record. And Castro turned in Spanish and said, "There's a lot of important things going on in the world that I'm not aware of. I have to pay greater attention." We had discussions about nuclear power.
Really?
We were very much against nuclear power.
Yeah.
We were in the process of stopping a nuclear power plant outside of Madison. And he felt that as an island nation with no natural sources of energy, that nuclear power was in Cuba's future. Probably the most important thing that we learned on that trip in our discussion with Castro was this. The United States, still to this day, wants reparations for American corporations that lost property during the course of the revolution, that they should be compensated. Well, the Cuban government did take all that property and all that wealth. But there's another side to the story, because virtually all of it was gained from about 1900, after the Spanish-American War, through the 1930s and into the 50s, through bribery and corruption. It was land and businesses of the Cuban people. The corrupt dictators took the today's comparable millions of dollars of bribes, took the land and the wealth of the Cuban people, their businesses, whether it was the telephone company or the sugar cane companies, and basically gave most of it to American businesses, and some went to wealthy Cuban families as well. And that's a part of the story that we don't tell.
You've been very publicly open about combating ICE and the
Yes.
hunt for illegal immigrants.
Yes.
Many people, including London-based rapper 21 Savage, have felt the heartbreak and the danger of
Yes.
that organization. And I don't know, some of your plans to hold up against them.
Well, the most effective tool that we have is a rapid response team here in Madison, that if ICE shows up,
Yeah.
people can be alerted. And the bottom line is this. If you are undocumented, the most important thing to do is not go to work and stay in place, in a home preferably, where there are no other undocumented people. One of the unfortunate things that happens is the first thing ICE does is go to folks' homes, and they go to their places of employment. And then other undocumented people who might not be there can get caught up in all of this and find themselves in deportation. Supposedly ICE is not going to do again in Madison what they did last September. And they were very frank. They were fearful that those of us in Madison would do what the mayor of Oakland had done. That is, Libby Schaaf, the mayor of Oakland, had advance notice and warning that ICE was coming, and she spilled the beans. She warned the community. And they said after that experience, knowing they were coming to Madison, they were fearful that between our police department and me, we'd do the same thing. And they were right, if we'd gotten the advance notice. So what they deliberately did was they, in effect, created a fiction. It's sort of like, say somebody calls you and you're obligated to call them back. And so what you do is you set up the return phone call in a manner that you know that they can't answer it. They know that you won't be there. And so ICE, wanting to meet its obligation to notify us, did in a way that was deliberately designed, and it worked, to not let us know that they were coming. And they've agreed that they'll never do that again. But I think the important thing we have to understand is this. It's not just a question of what happens the day ICE arrives and the threat of deportation. We've got families around the United States, here in Madison, every single day as the loved ones disperse and go off to school, go off to work. There's always this concern. We may not see you again. Something may happen during the course of the day where the undocumented individual, could be a parent, could be a child, could be multiple members of the family, is going to be taken away. And that's it. There were 83 people picked up by ICE in the state of Wisconsin over those 3 days. And ICE claims, that we've got really serious felons and very dangerous people. That's what their press release said. Our representative in Congress, Mark Pocan, has been trying through open records to get the identities and the charges against those 80-some people, to date unsuccessfully. And there's a reason why it's unsuccessful. It's because, and I'm just guessing here, but I'd estimate based on the way they spun this story, my guess is of the 83, at least 70 who were picked up were not dangerous folks, and there was no reason they could not stay here in the United States, even though they were undocumented. Now, there's a group of folks that were felons, but the reason they're felons is because they came into the United States, got deported, and returned. So once you've been deported, if you come back in again, you're a felon. That's their crime, trying to re-enter the United States. And then there's others that just don't have, shoplifting, a driving violation. And there's even some violations that are of concern but don't warrant destroying people's lives and their families, such as some domestic abuse calls. So we will continue to take on ICE. We will continue to fight for reform on citizenship, especially DACAs, the Dreamers.
Good answer. Do you think that you still have any room for improvement as mayor, or do you have any plans if you're reelected for something that you're gonna change up as the mayor?
Yes. There's several things that are in the works now. We really haven't announced them. We're just formulating them. I've already shared one with you, which is to take our retail program for groceries and to make investments in minority-owned and women-owned businesses far beyond that to any kind of retail. I've got the staff working on that. Could be hardware stores, could be drugstores, could be insurance companies, whatever. But I want to expand that program in that sense. Second thing that I want to do is get focused on the uninsured community. There are perhaps 20,000 households within all of Dane County that are not insured. We made big strides when in getting people insured when President Obama's Affordable Health Care Act was adopted. But there are still too many families that do not have health insurance. With Tony Evers as governor, and hopefully changes in terms of how we handle Medicaid, along with, again, going back to a peer support system, it's not good enough to do a TV ad. It's not good enough to send a note in a backpack. It's going to take one-on-one contact with trusting people to get to the point where we've got 0 families uninsured. So our health department is working on that right now, and I think we're gonna see some success. One of the other challenges that we have are what's been estimated to be 70 to 80 to 120 juveniles who I described earlier, who just are disassociated, disaffected from every one of our institutions. We've got to reach these kids before something really tragic happens to them or to somebody that they confront. And I think there's 2 things that need to be done in that case. We've got Briar Patch, which is a place for teens to go to if they want to. But in terms of juveniles and young adults who break the law, we used to have group homes here in Dane County. There is no longer a single group home for these kids. So in terms of a judge's options, you can send a child back to the home where things haven't worked out, or maybe you can send them to Lincoln Hills, which is just a disaster and ought to be closed. But group homes are not a choice. So the group homes statutorily are the responsibility of county government. I'd like to start working with our Dane County government in getting the group homes back going again.
Cool. Yeah, I think it'd be a great improvement. What is your favorite kind of unhealthy food?
Favorite kind of unhealthy food? Well, it's a toss-up, but I've got to go with the most important. A Chicago-style hot dog.
There we go.
A Vienna hot dog that's never been frozen. It's in a poppy seed bun that's been steamed. It's got a pickle. It's got chopped tomato and onions, celery salt, mustard, and a very crunchy new pickle. Everything else I've described is fairly healthy except the hot dog. But
making me
obviously
hungry.
It's the hot dog that does it.
I like that. If you are reelected as mayor, will you grow a victory beard?
No, but I had very privately said prior to returning to office in 2011 that if I won the election, I'd get my ear pierced. And I didn't.
It didn't happen?
Didn't happen. But I just might do it if I get reelected here.
Is there a chance?
I think it's a very good chance.
Which one do you think you'd do?
I can't remember. My wife, Sarah, kind of makes all of my fashion decisions for me.
Okay, she's got her head on straight.
We'll figure out which year it is and what it'll be.
Cool. I don't know, I think a nice diamond stud could be a good way to go.
That may be.
Yeah.
Or at least the fake stud.
What do you think is objectively the worst board game?
Board game?
Yeah. There's a lot of fun
Boy,
ones.
I have not played a board game in so long, but as a kid, I absolutely loved Monopoly. And I don't think anyone plays it anymore,
Still
which
decent
is
Monopoly.
why because it's such an awful game, and that is Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, that one stressed me out a lot. I
That's-
really didn't like that.
Clue can be interesting at times, but it oftentimes is a little slow.